So there were people opposed to what the CE5 contact program was from the very, very earliest days. Most people don't realize that. On the other hand, there's a senior official at the CIA who flew down on a jet to my town in North Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina, to say, do it, and don't give up. Someone's got to do this because it's completely out of control, and moreover, someone's going to have to spearhead not only making contact, but informing the public, because the system is so completely dysfunctional. Now, the person who was sent down was a man whose family founded the California Institute of Technology, one of the most prestigious universities in America, and is associated with the NSA and CIA. And I said, well, I'm a country doctor in North Carolina, rambling around in an ER, and I'm doing this sort of as just an ad hoc group to do this. He says, no, well, someone is going to have to do this. But also is going to have to educate the public. And I said, well, I'll do what I can in between ER shifts and raising 4 children. And as things went, that was sort of the initiation, and my initiation into this sort of weird, down the rabbit hole world of secret projects. I'm going, why is this guy coming as an emissary of this very senior CIA person who's involved in this, begging me to do something? Why don't they just do it? Anyway, so you're going to see this leitmotif repeated over and over again over the course of today. And at that point I said, okay, well, I will do what I can. And a few months later, there was a man named Bill Clinton, got elected to the presidency of the United States. And I was immediately approached by people who were friends of his, and who said, well, this is something that he's very interested in, and it's well known that his good friend Webster Hubbell, who was third in command at Justice Department prior to being convicted of some other problems, said that Bill Clinton asked that he wanted to know about 2 things. Who really killed Marilyn Monroe, because he had a fascination with Marilyn Monroe, and who killed Jack Kennedy, and also, what is this UFO stuff? Is there anything really to it? So he made a directed inquiry, and as Webster Hubbell reported in his book, Friends in High Places, this is not, you can read it and see, they made inquiries into the subject, and they, quote, were not happy with the answers they were getting, which is a polite way of saying they know they were being lied to. Well, at about that time, and a little bit before some of the Clinton folks approached me, some military people who were friendly to disclosure approached me, who had had experiences either on battleships or at strategic air command facilities where nuclear facilities are posted, and said, I'll do anything I can to help you. And one of these men was a naval commander who was very connected up in the Pentagon, and he showed up at my door, basically, at my home, and I thought initially he was a spook, a spy. And I said, well, this spook is probably here to disrupt my project. And it turns out he was a totally stand-up guy who did everything he could to set up a number of the meetings you're going to hear about behind the scenes in deep background briefings that I did at the Pentagon subsequently. And we decided to have a meeting. I was invited by a former State Department person to have a meeting at the Monroe Institute, which is ironically about 10 minutes from where my country home is now in Virginia, to discuss how to put together a team of people to brief the correct folks in government and encourage them to end the secrecy. Now, you have to understand this is 1992, 93. 22 years ago, 21 years ago, I was in my 30s, a bit naive about how government worked. I actually thought we had a functional constitutional government. I have since learned we do not. That's all window dressing. That's all the Truman Show, like the movie The Truman Show, where it's all sort of a fake. And that there's a parallel governmental process that runs this and other important issues that are completely out of the reach of the people we elect and appoint. But at that time, so we had this meeting, and it was decided that we should contact certain key people in the U.S. government to, in military speak, deconflict the CSETI contact teams from Air Force and other military operations so that they didn't interfere with us and we didn't interfere with them. That was the purpose of it, was to deconflict that, because we didn't want interference from those guys with what we were doing, which we were getting a lot of interference. We were getting helicopters, jets, all kinds of stuff coming in to our contact sites, and we still do to this day, which have been filmed and documented. So unfortunately, we said this is something that is really critical if we're going to make contact and not have it become something where something terrible happens accidentally. Okay, so my military advisor, who came forward, said, let's see what I can do and run this up the flagpole, as they say. And so he knew the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, an admiral, who, Admiral Kramer with a C, C-R-A-M-E-R. And he went in, had a meeting, and said, look, we really need to have a meeting with the Air Force intel people at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, to which the Roswell remains were sent, and which still had what was called the National Air Intelligence Center, and then it became the Foreign Aerospace Technology Center. It was always FTD, Foreign Technology Division of the Air Force, back in the 40s and 50s. It's gone through many name changes. It's the same facility at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. And he said, okay, let's see if you can set up a meeting. And the admiral, now this is the head of intelligence, Joint Chiefs of Staff, pushed back from the desk and said, are you serious about UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence? And the commander, military commander, who was volunteering to help us, said, yes, we're very serious. And so the admiral said, okay, I'll do it. So they refused to take the meeting. Now, so what happened is that J2, what's called J2, head of intelligence joint staff, called the head of Air Force intelligence and said, you will make this meeting happen. And Dr. Greer will be received there because they have something to discuss with those folks. And that was now the fall, September 1993. Okay, so that meeting was set up. Now in the meanwhile, some folks working with Boutros Boutros-Ghali, the UN Secretary General at the time, and Lawrence Rockefeller, who was the scion of the Rockefeller family, who was the philosopher king of the family. I mean, David Rockefeller was sort of the money guy with Chase Manhattan, which became J.P. Morgan Chase. And his nephew, Jay Rockefeller, was chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. And Nelson Rockefeller, who had passed away, who had been vice president, ironically, was his brother, who had set up the Rockefeller Commission of 1956 that completely reorganized the Department of Defense and the CIA so no U.S. president could contain or control or penetrate UFO projects. So the Rockefeller family up to their eyeballs in this. Lawrence knew that, but he was on the side of the angels. He wanted to sort of cleanse the karma, as it were, I believe, of that family and actually help. So a lot of people have, of course, attacked me for knowing a Rockefeller as proof that I'm sort of part of some cabal. I said, no, they contacted me because Lawrence knew that what we were doing was really novel and was effective because he had sent people, it turned out, to some of our events where we had had contact, where we did the CE5 protocols and ET craft would appear and then disappear. He went, he took this information back to Lawrence and said, this is no joke. So Lawrence Rockefeller invited me up to New York and then invited me to his ranch, the JY Ranch in Wyoming. And as you know, that's where the Clintons, for the first couple years of their presidency, would vacation in August. But I was asked to go there in September of 1993 to basically share what he thought would just be the information about the CE5 initiative. Lawrence Rockefeller did not know about the initiative to brief senior governmental officials and encourage them to end the secrecy, which had started a few months prior to that at this meeting in Virginia at the Monroe Institute with a select number of folks that my military advisors had gathered together. That was July of '93. So he just thought it was going to be a discussion about the protocols of the CE5 initiative, remote viewing, making contact, interstellar diplomacy, all of these concepts. And so we decided that it was really time for us to go ahead and have some meetings like this with Lawrence. And I said, okay, I'll go. Because I have to go out. I'm on a trip anyway, taking time off from my medical work in the ER to go to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which also Lawrence knew nothing about. Lawrence Rockefeller knew nothing about. So here's what happened. I was going to go to the Rockefeller Ranch just as sort of a guest to share this, and during the course of a sort of a round table, and there were all kinds of people there. Robert Bigelow of Bigelow Aerospace, who's a billionaire, was there. A whole bunch of people who of various backgrounds in the UFO subculture, some friendly to what we do and some incredibly unfriendly, who we found out were working for the intelligence community, were there. And there was this gathering at this famous Rockefeller Ranch in the Grand Tetons. So one day it came up what else I was working on. I said, well, we've initiated a project to brief senior government officials in the Clinton administration and the Pentagon and members of Congress so that we can terminate secrecy on this issue and get the government to change policy, because we understand that the incoming president is favorable to that idea, which was, of course, Bill Clinton. And as a result, you could have heard a pin drop in the room. Nobody knew at all. And the first thing Lawrence Rockefeller said, it was like this, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going straight to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base after this meeting to brief the colonel over this Foreign Technology Division of the Air Force. And then I'm going to, in a couple months, brief President Clinton's CIA director. So at this point, Lawrence Rockefeller and everyone there were in a state of shock. Now, that initiated what has been incorrectly called the Rockefeller Initiative. There was no Rockefeller Initiative. Let me explain that in a moment. What it was an initiative because he found out what we were doing, and his people said, you've got to get involved with this. So Lawrence wanted to play a behind-the-scenes role, and that's why he was willing to host the President and First Lady at the ranch to provide what we put together, which was called the best available evidence, which is the collection of best cases, best photos, best government documents we had that were extant at that time in 1993. So the President was invited out in the following summers, 2 summers, to the Rockefeller Ranch for that purpose.